Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fauscette. Each week, we interview experts in artificial intelligence, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. Our show today is the March edition of AI Pulse. I'm joined by, as usual, by my co-host, Tom Pringle, Director of Pilot Research. Tom, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Nice to be here as always.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And once again, lots of fun stuff to talk about this month. I've decided that we're going to start putting a tag for each month, and the tag for this month is Agentic.
Yeah, as previous listeners will know, possibly not my favorite term ever.
Well, I don't know.
I mean, maybe it's just like technology that does stuff. I'm just saying.
Well, I mean, I will say that if nothing else, it has garnered the news waves for the month for different announcements. I mean, Adobe this week, the summit this week, they announced an army. I love that, an army of AI agents for sales and marketing. So that's exciting. And, well,
an army of autonomous things. What could possibly go wrong?
I don't see how that could be bad at all. I don't know. And then of course, Salesforce. I went to TDX, so their developer conference was, AgentForce everywhere. And I mean, a fairly good bit of news there. I mean, a new release of AgentForce, which is, if you think about it, 6, 7, maybe 8 months ago, they first released it. And they've got 3 basically larger updates they've done, and then also they have a free developer edition now, which is obviously trying to build an ecosystem. And they announced a Trailblazer program called Agent Blazer. They're trying to get like some insane number, like 2 million people by the summer, or I don't know, something like that. That's probably not the exact number, so don't quote me. But
but I mean, it's going to be a big number regardless.
I mean, yeah, I mean, and it was, there's a lot of excitement there. And I actually built an agent using a tool, using AgentForce, but also using a tool that they haven't, that's just in beta right now, that I think comes out in the summer. That is a conversational UI for AgentForce. And so you basically, you don't touch the keyboard at all. I just talked to the machine, and it made an agent, and the agent did everything that my bot on my site did, that took me, a long time to build. So 10 minutes worth of work, and I proved that I did things in a very inefficient way earlier.
Yeah, I mean, that says something about a common theme that tends to pop up in our conversations, which is the pace of change is quite quick. Although I will say this, it's interesting. You mentioned having this theme of Agentic. I think a lot of themes previously have been about how many billions upon billions upon billions have been raised, spent, whatever. I think it's interesting. There's been less talk about that recently. I like to occasionally be questioning. I wouldn't say cynical.
I would say cynical, but okay.
And maybe you'd be right. Maybe you'd be wrong. I think it would depend. But what's really funny about it, though, is, I was thinking about this a lot. I think about the amount of money that's gone into AI. And I'm getting, we're going to talk about vibe coding later. I'm getting too big to fail vibes around AI in some aspects, which is, there's just so much money gone into it now. There's this kind of scramble to find applications that deliver a significant kind of business value, which has been tough.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of VC money flowing for sure, and the thing that I saw this month, and for the last couple of months, you started to see this trend, is now you're starting to get the ecosystem from the vendor, right? So now Perplexity has a VC fund, and they're investing in startups that will add to their business or whatever, and because those key kind of LLM / GPT companies have grown so quickly and raised so much money, they've got a lot of money to invest in an ecosystem or a farm team or I don't know, whatever you want to call it, right? Which is sort of what it ends up being, right? Here's my lab to see what I might want to build eventually, but I can just bring it in because I invested in it.
Yeah. I mean, there's huge money at stake, and I think that's kind of true in two senses. Obviously, the one we'll be talking about here, which is the investment in it, but also we've talked about it a lot, the potential upside, right? So is the potential upside worth it? Maybe, maybe not. And I think it will be fascinating seeing this play out because agents feel like, to me at least, a much more visceral way in which people can kind of potentially get some value out of all of the AI hype.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair assessment. It's like you have to think of this in a continuum of activity, right? The early stuff, the early GPT stuff, so was early 2.5 years ago. Um, how we change. But the early stuff was really about that, oh, this is really cool. I'm using it personally to come up with a cookie recipe. And over a little bit of time, people started to use it to generate content. And the early stuff was well, it wasn't great, but it could be edited and used for research and I don't know whatever. But it quickly has evolved into tools that are you're starting to see them embedded inside of enterprise apps, and I think to me that's when you start to see the shift. Right, is when it actually becomes a part of the thing that your process or you're already doing this, and so that I think has been a big piece of it. And then, of course, the step into, oh, and by the way, now we've figured out a way for these things to not only answer your questions, but also fix the problem. So do stuff.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, exactly, and I think kind of and I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think it's interesting seeing how this plays out. Um, we talk about the complexity of tech stacks in larger businesses and organizations,
Mhm.
and to say complexity may be a fair understatement.
Yeah.
What was that line that people used a while ago? Frankenstack.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's no question about that. But I have an interesting theory around the back end of that, though. But go ahead.
Okay,
Finish
well,
your thought.
maybe it's aligns. Let's see, or maybe we'll have
Well,
a solid
and
disagreement.
yeah, it was interesting. I was talking to so some of the Salesforce Data Cloud folks when I was at TDX. Well, and a couple of the like more senior product people around
Mhm.
Agentic, and and one of the things that I've started to believe, and you're starting to see this from other sectors like maybe Informatica or NetApp or some of the more infrastructure focused larger companies, but the idea that we're getting to a place pretty soon where the agent actually solves those problems. So if you're having a problem with data because it's siloed. But if you had an agent that could run against all your data and just know
Mhm.
where it is, it doesn't have to move it. It just has to know where it is, right? Because that's the problem. If you're trying to search for it and you don't know where to look, you can't cross those boundaries. But if you could build something that would,
Yeah.
pretty soon we get to the point where the data is self-repairing, and that changes everything, really.
Yeah. Get out my head. It just makes my point. I mean, I'll let
Well,
you have
good.
it on this occasion because I'm going to be polite and diplomatic about it. No, but seriously, I think you're dead right. I think the complexity of sort of the technology landscape in bigger organizations has become so great. And people forget, it's all very easy to talk about everything being in the cloud. And of course, the answer is that there's lots of different clouds and they might not necessarily always play well together, potentially, or it might be that data's in different formats, for example, just simple stuff we've been dealing with for
Yeah.
decades. But kind of what's interesting is you might find that there's mainframes and batch systems and all sorts of other stuff in there as well. And I think the way that I see it is this kind of highly complicated, very disparate, very heterogeneous landscape of technologies, and the agent model helps sort of tie some of that together in a way which
Yeah.
would the effort to try and do an integration or migrate or whatever just wouldn't be worth it. Just like,
No.
well, so
No, and
expensive.
not to even mention even the risk of just moving all the data around,
Right.
right?
I
Data
see.
in motion is always at risk, right? So if you
Mhm.
could leave it where it is and only pull the parts you need when you need them, To me,
Uh,
that's a pretty big benefit.
Indeed. My question about it, though, and again, you can decide whether I'm being cynical or not, is yeah, write in, folks, let us know. Is kind of where where does this go? So if we're saying it's super complicated, it's in lots of different places, lots of complexity, or we could just say it's a mess, right?
Yeah, you could
And
call it
then
a mess. I my favorite word was something from the old days from NetSuite that was calling them it a hairball, which I think is an accurate way to depict the data in a lot of companies.
I was talking to a senior leader in the world of tech the other day, and we were talking about this set of systems. And I said, "Yes, it sounds like they described it as being a bit like spaghetti." And I said, "Yeah, spaghetti that's been stuck in a blender."
Yeah, that's exactly right. I was thinking thrown against the wall, but that's a different analogy completely. So never mind.
Anyway, yeah. So can I think do we end up in a situation where we cannot see the trees for the wood, if you see what I'm saying, at some
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
So
I mean, it is an interesting issue, right?
when we start to lose, so it's like, for example, we always worry about people leaving organizations and taking valuable knowledge with them.
Right.
What happens when that knowledge only exists inside a piece of software?
Well, that they're not going to go work somewhere else. I hope. I mean, I guess maybe they will get to the point where they could, but
Could, yeah, absolutely. But what happens when that piece of software isn't available for some reason?
yeah. Well,
Or something has to
yeah.
be explained to the regulatory authorities about why a certain action was taken based on data
Yeah.
stitched together by an agent. And they go, well, we can't explain that. And that to me potentially raises some red flags.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because the last few things that I've written for my blog have touched on some of that because I agree with you. I think that's an issue we're going to have to really think about when it comes to transparency and black boxes and responsibility, which is a big issue.
Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking though, when we were talking about the data piece, the automation piece, besides the fact that you could automate QA, which I think is a huge benefit, is the capability to create in real time synthetic data that fills a gap that the agent finds in your data. And I think that's the other piece that we haven't talked about, but could be really beneficial if because we know you're going to have to use synthetic data in certain places because you're not going to have enough data. But if you had a way to create that in the process of retrieval, then that would solve a lot of that risk, right?
Mm. Tell me a bit more about that. So you're saying obviously synthetic data has become a big topic. It's been growing for a
Mhm.
while, just simply based on the requirements of training.
Mhm.
Are you saying kind of generating synthetic data for additional training of stuff, or are you talking about generating for something else?
I'm talking well for two places. One for training right now is one of the interesting ones, right? Because
Mm.
that's an obvious place that you could solve the problem. But there's also the idea of certain types of context or certain types of data that you don't have quite a robust enough set to provide that context in the function of the agent, right? So I'm trying to solve a
Gotcha.
customer problem and I'm trying to find this and I can't find profiles that match this customer, but I need a way to simulate this in the back so that I can. It's the digital twin idea, right? I can build a digital twin and simulate, or I can fill in data that builds out what I think is the right model and test it. There's a lot of places where you could fill gaps in the data with synthetic data if you had a way to create it. The problem is, I mean, you could create it, but it would take too long. So it has to be something that happens in the process, right?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think isn't it fascinating kind of the way that that would work in theory. I mean, I like your profile example. That does work for me. I think what's interesting is what happens if, say, for example, that idea is let loose or accidentally on purpose in kind of doing financial reporting.
I mean,
So I'm
I
going to
might could
fill.
use that now that you say that. That's an interesting idea. No, never mind.
But you kind of go. So we're going to use some synthetic data to model something or to complete a process, which it has kind of a significant real world impact about how we say, for example, reports
I
work.
Yeah, see, I like to focus on the other side of that. The exciting piece of, gee, I could build a digital twin of my organization and do test strategies before I implemented them. So that's cool, right? In real time
Yeah.
testing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm always going to present possibly
No,
a
no,
slightly
it's
more
good.
cautious approach.
It's good. I know. I mean,
Um,
yeah, I like to race fully into the fire. I don't want to care about that. But I mean, we were talking about Agentic though, and I wanted to make sure I put in one more of those things because you talked about the money, and this is a great example of money that's flowing in, and that was ServiceNow's acquisition of MoveWorks.
mhm.
I forget the exact number, but I want to say it was like 3.8 billion or something. It was a crazy big number.
It was lots and lots
Yeah,
and lots and lots of money.
lots. Well, and I mean that's a I you expect this, right? This is the time when you expect those bigger companies that are trying to fight against each other. Salesforce, obviously, big competitor with ServiceNow, is deeply into Agentic and has been now for several months, and more than 2,000 live customers, I think was the right number they gave us. So that's not bad.
It's significant.
Um, yeah, well, yeah, it is, and so with ServiceNow trying to catch up on that side with MoveWorks, which is an interesting company, and I did look at them because I'm often out looking at agents and trying to give them a test just to see kind of what they'll do, how good are they, how easy are they to build, all those kinds of things, right? And MoveWorks is interesting, but they do have one. They have one of my pet peeves. That is, their pricing is 100% not transparent. And I hate that. I hate that on the site. Just put the prices up there. Like, just don't tell me call the sales guy because I'm not gonna.
You know what it's like then. Is there's a constant debate about whether people should publish pricing in that direct a way. I'm with you. I think it would make much more sense to have completely crystal clear pricing. And yeah, there's always going to be those cases where kind of enterprise deals require negotiation and discounting and stuff like that. But clarity in the pricing is important to me. I think otherwise, how do you know what you're getting into?
Yeah. And I mean,
Um,
there can even be a variable component. Like I'm not arguing that there aren't certain situations like, oh, I want to access the open AI's API and so you're going to charge me tokens and I can buy them in bundles or I can,
yeah,
whatever. I mean, to me, that's fair as long as you identify that up front and I understand how to plan, how to budget for it, right?
yeah, exactly. It's a reminiscent of the bill shock that a lot of people got when they went into the cloud first.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I didn't realize that calling that function over and over and over again.
Well,
Oh,
and yeah, no, and the other thing I found was in some of the agentic startups, and not in the big companies at all, but in the some of the agentic startups, when you get there and you'll see free trial and then a paid version.
mhm.
Well, the free trial is it pops you into a fake environment with a demo database that lets you build an agent against that data, so you can see how an agent would work, and then that's
Yeah.
it. That's your trial.
I've always been a big fan of the free trial. My favorite always being, we used to talk a lot about land and expand and
Yep.
kind of that sort of thing. But I think getting people familiar with the technology is no bad thing to do. I think a lot of people, I don't know, I think a lot of people struggle to envisage how they would use it for that, kind of how they would use it and how, and possibly are quite surprised by how easy it is to do compared to how it used to be. So as you were saying just a few minutes ago, that kind of voice UI agent experience versus building the chatbot you did, what was it, a year and a half ago, something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
it was a couple of years, well, probably a year and a half ago, that's fair.
yeah, something like that. It was a while, but it just shows in that period of time how it's moved on. And I think sometimes because I would regard myself as a conservative small c user of AI. I do use it sometimes. I find it brilliant, for example, for helping collate kind of some desk research. I'm doing research projects
Mm.
and kind of looking through that and finding interesting sources and stuff like that. It's brilliant, absolutely fantastic. Um, I think I've surprised myself a couple of times when I've used some of these tools more recently and gone, well, damn, that's not only very good, but also very easy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I like that. Speaking of that, I don't know if you saw this week, but, the, Adobe summit, they announced a PowerPoint generator that takes raw data, and
Yep.
the name of that was Project Slide Wow. They do have
Projects.
good marketing people there. I don't know.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah, yeah.
So cool technology, 100% love it. I think the idea is really good, but just to be sarcastic for 1 second, because British people are never sarcastic.
No.
Never happens. It's what the world really needs now is more PowerPoint.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and to back that up, I mean, Canva also does the automated PowerPoint, but then to your point of funding, one of the announcements over the last couple of weeks was a company called Present or Present. I don't know exactly. Present, I suppose, since it's slide. They raised 20 million for automating slide decks.
Yeah, and slide decks, whether we like it or not, are here to stay. I suspect. Fact of life.
Well, otherwise, how would you raise money if you're a startup? Yeah, you got to have a slide deck.
Yeah, you've got to take your pitch deck. I mean, come on.
I mean, that's the way it works. I don't know.
That's what I'm told. It's nothing to do with the business idea whatsoever. It's all about
never.
I mean, call me old-fashioned, but I was like, a pretty deck's a pretty deck, and that's fantastic. And I have seen some amazingly pretty PowerPoints.
Yeah, no, it's fun. And I mean, I've made some that I thought were good. I've never tried I've used the automated tool just to do like one slide or something, but I haven't really tried it for a whole deck. But that's interesting, and I do want to give that a shot.
I'll give that a go. I will give that a go. And it's interesting though, because I say, I mean, like I said, call me old-fashioned, but as pretty as the deck is, I always thought what the words or the idea that the deck was trying to convey was the most important bit.
Well, I mean, that is true, but it's the prettiness of the deck doesn't necessarily make the message more effective, but the ugliness of the deck definitely makes the message less effective.
Absolutely. I like those decks where you get like an essay. You get an essay per slide.
Yeah, the ones that are like in 6-point font. You can only see them if you have a magnifying glass. Yeah, that's what we used to joke in most of the companies I've worked for. That was the engineering approach to slide decks.
Oh dear. Hopefully you can't hear my dog barking in the background.
A little bit, but they do that. I'm lucky because mine's muted, so my dog is muted. Actually, she doesn't really like to bark, so that's good.
Oh, that's a good. Trust me, we've got a lot of barking there. And it just seems to be another theme that runs through my conversations with you. So last time around, my mom sent something to the printer. That was fun. I did tell her I was on a podcast at this time, between this time and this time today, and she sent me a text.
Well, that's good. I mean, that's nice.
I love my mom. She's great. Her ability to accidentally interrupt at the wrong moment is genuinely hilarious.
I mean, it's a talent that
I think it makes her even more adorable, but I would say that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Anyway, so talking about conferences this week, the one that I was excited to hear what was going to happen was NVIDIA's. I don't know if you saw some of the announcements that came out of that. One that I thought you would particularly like is the new NVIDIA upcoming personal AI computers.
Yeah, I think, what was it? Again, maybe don't quote me on it, but wasn't it 768 gigabytes of RAM?
Crazy amounts of, yeah. I don't remember the exact details, but unbelievably. But of course, the price is also
significant.
Significant. Yeah, I can't think of a better word to say. Significant. Yeah, that's the word.
This is the one way you're never going to shock me when it comes to the prices on this stuff, because having been an avid PC gamer for many years, I am very familiar with the concept of components costing more than you could possibly justify. But you have to have it because you want to play the latest, greatest game in the very best visual settings. So, I mean, a $4,000 computer does not scare me as being an expensive computer. Yes, money. Yeah. I don't doubt it. But I'm very curious to how they're going to. I mean, they must be able to do it effectively. Most computers struggle to use, kind of more than 32 gigabytes.
Yeah, 32 or 64. Yeah,
and 64.
Yeah. I mean, Apple's finally building some MacBooks with more than that, but yeah, it's always been kind of an interesting challenge. Although one of the subtext of this idea of them producing this computer, though, is the fact that, of course, they partnered with some of the main computer manufacturers to build
Mhm.
these computers, because they're not going to build their own computer factories, of course. And that is an interesting competitive move against some of the other companies that are trying to go towards the chip direction.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's totally fair. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, uh, uh, I saw a lot of stuff come out. We had CES earlier in the year and previously, obviously, yeah, but kind of built for AI computers. It's all about AI, and it was, I don't know. It felt like it was stickers on stuff that no one really wanted. Whereas this
Mhm.
seems like a different direction, which is obviously something that's much more specialized,
Yeah.
particularly for a use case. But we'll see what happens. I mean, my interest will always be: can it run Flight Simulator, and if so, how many frames?
Yeah. Can I get it? I mean, the thing is, like, with the chips, of course, the announcements with the chips, to underneath that too, was probably the bigger piece. This year's Blackwell Ultra, which is, I guess, souped up Blackwell from last year. And then next year's is Rubin, or if you read below that, it's Vera Rubin, because apparently Vera is the new CPU and Rubin is the new GPU. I don't know why that stuck with me, but I just thought that was interesting, and especially when you hear the fact that they're making the CPU this time, and they've never done that
Mhm.
before, right? They always just bought off the shelf CPUs. So apparently they're going to try to optimize even more. And some I saw some stat that said that the Rubin chips were more than twice as fast, I think, or something like that. So
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm afraid it's sort of fairly analogous with our money conversation.
mhm.
The inevitable march of it gets faster and faster and faster, although also more and more expensive.
Well, yeah, yeah, it does, it
I mean,
does.
let's call a spade, right? It does. It is getting. I mean, it always was expensive. It has gotten more expensive,
Yeah,
and I think it's interesting, genuinely interesting, as to whether that has actually a negative market impact. Because
yeah.
are we going to sort of land in a situation where only a handful of organisations can afford the compute power or the necessary specialised compute power to really make advances in the space?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you know, that a lot of the competition that's trying to come towards this ARM and some of the other, chip makers and other companies that are working around chips, Google and Meta. I know they've both done some research there, but that they've been trying to get the price down. Obviously, that's not in NVIDIA's best interest, so they're not trying to get the price down. But I mean, I think there will be enough competitive pressure over some period of time that you start to see those GPUs come down in price because of that.
I hope so. Again, possibly from selfish gaming perspective.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of price, the other one that hit me this week was, or a couple weeks ago, I guess, when OpenAI released O1 Pro. Um, it's like 10 times the price of the original O1 release, and more than twice as expensive as the 4.5 release. So, I mean, you're definitely starting to see the price of access to these models probably reflecting the fact that the price of the GPUs and everything else is still really high. It's starting to go up pretty significant.
Yeah, just yes. We've seen, the charging that some people are willing to pay. I mean, we talked. What was it last month? We talked. Was it last month we talked about sort of the $200 a month subscription,
Yeah.
and then there's sort of more recently about you're going to get access to models and sort of agent-like capabilities that are the equivalent of having a PhD student sat next to you
Yeah.
at X thousand, which I can imagine there'd be use cases for
Mhm.
um, out of the reach of many,
Yeah.
obviously. But I suppose the only concern I've got again comes back to, which is sort of displacement of human labour,
Yeah.
and I do think that's going to have an impact that people still don't want to talk about, and a lot of people just don't want to talk about it. And I get it. I wrote a piece in, would it 2018 or 2019, sort of asking, we need to start talking about this now because it's going to happen. And I still don't see an awful lot of effort going into that conversation.
Yeah.
Um, but it is what it is. And I think kind of the pricing of these things, for lots of people, if you're not familiar with the world of enterprise software, especially, I think the cost of software can be incredibly surprising to some people. So, they used to like going out to the store and buying a video game for their kid, for example. It's like, well, these days they're expensive too, but so $50, $60 or something like that, maybe a bit more. And I know that just dated me terribly, because actually probably what you do is you download it via
it.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying. It's still $60, $80, whatever. But you can get to enterprise pricing conversations. It's tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we're talking about a tool that really is kind of that enterprise grade and provides the kind of value that we expect out of that kind of spend. Then we're going to see the prices do that, and it's going to be interesting, because at the moment we've got these sort of two centers of gravity around the sort of personal AI use cases and then the business enterprise use cases. At the moment, the pricing hasn't quite it's not quite developed yet, I don't think.
No, and I don't. I mean, the vendors, all the vendors that I talk to are struggling around what's the right pricing model, right? And I mean, some of the larger vendors have gone down the path of, we're not going to charge extra for this, we're just going to build it in, versus the other side of it where, and by the way, I said this before, I think, but those companies that are making the free decision are the companies that own their own stack, so they at least have control of their cost. So I get it, and charging for tokens, charging for use, whatever. We're Wild West for another year or two anyway, from a pricing perspective, I think, because I just don't think we know what companies are willing to pay for this until you can really start to demonstrate the value of it, right?
Yeah, for sure. No, I think that's 100% right. I think the pricing is definitely very much up in the air at the moment.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is too, I think you're going to see, reasoning models are just going to be more valuable, I think, and in general, that's been the case. As they've started to bring out more and more reasoning models, and companies are trying to use them and understand it. And actually, one of the other announcements that tied to that I thought was interesting was was a conversation, and I shared the VentureBeat article with you, but the around RAG search, or how do you I guess the question is, how do you integrate real-time search into an LLM? And for the most part, it's been done through RAG search, um, or through a prompt injection. So rather than having access to it all the way, it's just it hits it as context. So it could pull it in the retrieval, or it could you could tell it to do it in the prompt. But the thing is, with the reasoning model, it don't work, right? Because it's iterative. So it's going back and forth through its thought process, and if it can only bounce back to the internet off of that initial search or that initial prompt, then you're not, it won't support it, right? It won't work. And they were talking about this new approach, Search R1, which changes that model and integrates the actual internet connection into the search, so it can do the iteration as it thinks through things inside of that process of reasoning versus outside the process of reasoning.
Yeah, it's I think you've described that extremely well. Congratulations.
Probably more than I needed to share, but I could. I thought it was interesting when I was thinking through it, because like we know RAG is a good method for context, but it's not great for internet context, because it does retrieve the wrong things sometimes, and the more nebulous the thing it's trying to pull in, the more likely it is to not do it correctly, right? So
yeah, it's interesting. I kind of always figured, I don't know, and this is just thinking out loud, I guess, really, is that RAG seems like an approach for context within a use case or organization, right? So, and company has a particular way of doing business, whatever that is, and RAG is a very good way of using a big model and bringing in organizational context. I think the integration of search engines, it's funny, so how do you integrate search engines into the reasoning models, the multi-step models? I nearly stopped you right there and said, carefully.
Yeah, well, I mean, there that's a good
'Cause
that's a good argument.
it would be hard to claim that everything that one finds on the internet is either 100% verifiably true, and also necessarily possibly appropriate as well. So I'd be curious to know, how they're going to handle that, right? So it may, with great authority, tell you that, I don't know, that I've got blonde hair when I don't have blonde hair, because someone told me that I've got blonde hair.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah,
I just think it's
fair.
interesting. I think there will have to be in that multi-step process, and maybe it's there already. Maybe I'm being unfair, or not unfair. I'm questioning something they've already thought a great deal about and built something around it. I haven't read it all yet, which is, kind of, how do you have that live balance, framework, check, whatever you want to call it, as it goes through those multi-step
Yeah,
reasoning
I
process.
mean, that's the search R1 approach, really. That's what it's saying, is that it's building it into its iteration, so it has access to the internet directly inside the model as it's iterating around that as it's doing its reasoning at each
Yeah,
step. And that way it can not only pull things in, but it can also validate them, because that's a part of the reasoning, right? It's going through a process to validate the thing that it's coming up with. And so that, I mean, to me, that makes a lot more sense. Um, and I think you'll see this over time. And like some of the vendors that have done generative AI inside their applications, a few of them early built into this prompt approach that I was
mhm.
talking about from an internet search perspective, but they also have it for context. It just builds in, it retrieves in the prompt, so it's not using RAG. It's actually just building prompts that are very specific and have a certain template. Like the example is one that filters PII, personally identifiable information, out of the prompt as it's going into the LLM and then coming back out. It adds it back, and that's all done in the prompt, not in the in RAG itself, which you could do with RAG if you
Yep.
had it, but if you didn't set it up that way. So, I mean, it seems like we're evolving here, and certainly reasoning models were an evolution. So I get that. But I just thought it was an interesting idea of how do you solve this? Well, the most direct way to solve it is to build it in as it's going through its reasoning.
Yeah. Carefully.
Yep. Well, yeah, carefully, I agree. And then I know you saw this article because we were chatting about this a little bit earlier, but I have to throw this one out there because I love this one. It's the world is changing, right? It's not SaaS anymore. It's not software as a service. Now it's service as software. What do you think? Is that good? Yeah. For agents, I mean, to me, it makes sense. I don't know.
I get it. I think my brain started to leak out my ear slightly. Uh, oh no, I mean, I get it. So yeah, the logic, I understand the argument. I totally get it. Do I like it? No. I mean, right?
I can't figure out the acronym because it can't be SAS, because then of course that's either an old military unit in the UK, or it's a, a analytics company in the US. So either way, it doesn't work, right?
That's yeah, indeed, special air service. Um, so yeah, problems from a branding perspective.
It
But
does seem like it has some problems there, but I mean, that's not
let's
my
let
job.
other people worry about that. I get the concept. It actually, and the reason as much as I don't like the language around it, the concept I feel is very sound on the basis that, the software, the technology is really the important bit as far as the end user is concerned. They're concerned about what they put in, what they get out.
They're concerned about you getting the thing out that but I mean, is that different? I'm not sure that's different from the way it's always been. If I use a computer program, I'm not really using it to use it. I'm using it to get something done, right?
Precisely. Although many would have us believe that, of course, one program is better than another program. I'm told that that's a thing. So,
I mean,
uh,
I don't.
yeah.
It's yeah.
So, but from a kind of the backward agents, I'm afraid, obviously, from the kind of world of agents that we were talking about, it kind of makes sense, I guess.
I mean, I think so. Well, so changing gears a little bit. I don't know. the audience saw this, but I know you took a look at this article that Fast Company put out last week, I think. I don't know, maybe 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
about 15 most innovative artificial intelligence companies for 2025. And I mean, obviously, the word innovation in there makes me think of something different. I was a little surprised by the list, because over half of it, or about half of it anyway, is dominated by those large names that you would automatically think of if you were thinking of, AI. So Microsoft and, NVIDIA, those guys. And and I mean, obviously down to the OpenAIs and Anthropics and those. I mean, certainly you argue those are very innovative companies, but then you get finally the last half of the list get down to the startups that seem to be actually doing something that I would call innovative. Any surprises to you though on the list?
No, I think you've kind of basically underscored my thought on that particular list. There were some very big names up at the top. No real surprise, I suppose. And it depends on one's personal definition of innovation, I guess, to a degree. I thought when I saw the title, I thought it would be much more down the other end of the list that you were mentioning, with all the startup world, and who was doing what and cool stuff on the sides, which I think is often where some of the most interesting innovation happens.
Yeah.
But it's a solid list. I mean, it'd be very hard pressed to claim that the giant companies aren't being innovative in what they're doing.
I,
I think.
I mean,
I think
they are. I mean, it is the innovation from an AI perspective is everywhere right now. But then compare, maybe what Microsoft's doing to a startup like Gretel, which is actually I mentioned Gretel because it's a synthetic data startup, so it fits into our other conversation. But I mean, what they're doing is considerably more, in my mind, more innovative than that. But I guess degrees of innovation doesn't necessarily mean that you can take one of those companies, big or small, off the list. So
no, totally fair. I think it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's a little bit like the conversation we were having earlier about sort of the resources involved and potential cost involved.
yeah.
And there was that conversation we had. Was it a month ago or 2 months ago?
I don't know. They all run together at this point.
They do. But when we talked about DeepSeek and sort of the differences in sort of training and what was believed about it at the time and so on and so forth, I think where some startups obviously have a scarcity of resources, and I think it can lead them down interesting paths that are potentially pivots away from the existing wisdom.
I won't argue that one way or the other. I'm not
No,
sure. No. Well, I mean, I don't know. The innovation comes from all quarters. The
sure.
world we live in right now is going to need that AI innovation has to continue at this pace because it's, companies are investing a lot of money in it. And obviously we know there are areas where it's doing really well, and there are other areas where there's still, work to be done. Like, is the way to say that.
Yeah, fair. Like personal definitions of innovation, I think, is possibly the concluding note to that particular branch of conversation. And actually, talking of branches of conversation, I am looking at the time thinking, good grief, we are getting very dangerously close to
We are, yeah, we are. And I always save a funny story to the end. So I have a funny story that I know you've seen too. And
I approve. I approve.
I, you know, I love this idea of vibe coding, and I've been
Mhm.
watching this kind of evolve and the culture around it evolve. But well, the story came out around the AI coding assistant Cursor that developer vibe coding was interacting with the model, and and the model basically told him to do your own work.
Do you remember we talked about armies of agents and what could possibly go wrong?
Right.
No, I just thought it was absolutely brilliant. I mean, if memory serves, and again, maybe don't quote me on this one, it was almost a bit sort of paternalistic about it in some ways. It's like,
it, it was.
if I do your job for you, you won't be able to do your job, kind
Yep.
of approach, which was interesting. Possibly not what one would expect to pop out. On the other hand, maybe all my concerns about AI and human labor displacement and all those sorts of things are actually completely unfounded on the basis that ultimately AI will say, do the damn thing yourself.
I mean, it does fit into your theory around replacement there, right? I mean, this would be a counter to it's not going to replace us because it's going to tell us we need to do stuff ourselves. I like that. I mean, it's it's a scolding parent maybe, but but I do like it. I mean, I don't know. Anyway, well, so your observation is correct. We certainly are out of time for today, but fun as always, a fun conversation. So I'm Michael Fauscette.
I'm Tom Pringle.
And that would be our episode for today. And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining us. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the show. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review to help others find us. For more research on AI and other software, check out arianresearch.com. If you're an expert in AI, generative AI, or business automation, either as a provider or an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arianresearch.com. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arian Research production. I'm Michael Fauscette, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.